we lack there, tragically, is real imaginative and bold leadership at the spiritual and especially the political level, willingness to move ahead and actually do it. The same is true in the relations among between Islamic and Christians, and even within the Islamic world. The people who are willing to kill for the faith and not just die for it are, of course, the ones who make headlines. And it doesn't take very many of them to make a lot of noise and to be very destructive and very dangerous. There's no doubt about it. But I think their star is setting, and something much more important and much more sweeping is going on among and between religious traditions that will eventually make a dent, one hopes, on the political leadership if they are not just don't give a tin ear to all of this. One word then more about Afghanistan. We're all rightly concerned about Afghanistan and the possibility of our being mired once again as Americans there. One has to remember that the Islamic radical Islamic movements in Afghanistan really began after the Soviet invasion in, I think it was 1977, 78, when the United States quickly moved to arm and train, recruit, fund, not just Afghans, but Arabs who would come in from other parts of the world to defend Afghanistan. And right away, we Americans suggested to these folks that this should be viewed as a holy war, a jihad. We called them mujahideen. Now, the word jihad is embedded in that word mujahideen. Some people have seen the movie called Charlie Wilson's War, where he campaigned to have ground-to-air rockets sent over there. They used them very effectively, and they not only used the rockets, they applied the ideology of jihad to ridding their country of the Russians. But once they had done that, it dawned on them that they could use the same kind of religio-ideological slogans and appeal to recruit people and turn toward anybody who was invading or occupying their country. Now, just about a week ago, more or less unnoticed here in the United States, the guy who's the head of the Taliban, I think his name is Abdullah Omar, issued a public statement in the form of a letter to President Obama, where he said, you really ought to read the history of Afghanistan, and pointed out that the Afghans have successfully repelled and hurled back every invader since Alexander the Great. And they've all been there, and they've all failed. And there is no reason to think why the present occupation or effort by the United States, increasingly abandoned, by the way, in Afghanistan by any other allies, should succeed where the others have failed. I think it's a situation. I think we have to understand that we are in part responsible for sparking this kind of radical Islam, and the burning of heretics and the banning of people and the schisms and all of the ugly history. Now, admittedly, throughout that period, there were wonderful personalities that emerged. One has only to think of St. Francis of Assisi or St. Teresa of Avila. There are many, many people, but they were all, to some extent, swimming against the stream and had to watch out over their shoulders for the Inquisition or some other kind of enforcer of hierarchy and of dogma. Then, sometime I'm dating it in the late 19th, early 20th century, we began to see the diminishing of that definition of Christianity based on creed and hierarchy. a lot of opposition to it. There are a lot of new movements emerging. So as it has gathered speed, especially with Christianity now spreading all around the world, and again, in fact, the fastest growing parts of Christianity are now in Asia, in Africa, the Asian Rim, South America, and not in the old precinct of Christendom in Europe and the United States. And in those areas, remember, Christians live cheek by jowl, week after week, year after year, with people of a variety of different religious convictions, different symbol systems, and have learned to see that Christianity does have a unique message. We would all say that there's something unique and valuable about the message of Jesus. But it's not an exclusive message, and it's one that finds its place within other unique expressions. That is the future of faith in a nutshell. Now, a very important part of that is a rediscovery on the part of, here I would say again, Christians and people in other faiths, of the earth, the planet that we live on, as a gift to us, not as something we own, but as something we have a responsibility, a stewardship is the biblical term for it, to care for it, to nurture it, to love it, to respect it. And this is something which got very badly lost through the whole period of, mostly through that period of hierarchical and dogmatic Christianity, which is so theoretical and not really very earthy. Here we have a reemergence of a rooted, grounded way of thinking about faith, in which how one lives one's life in this world, with other people and with other creatures, has become much more the focus rather than seeing this world as a kind of a preparation for some other world. There's much less of that now. It's living by faith in this world, with a recognition, as the people in the social forum say, that another world is possible. By that they mean a way of living in this world and with this world, which is not the exorbitant and destructive mode that we've had over the last centuries of living in this world. Now, let me just add something to that might amuse you. A couple of weeks ago, to mark my retirement here at Harvard as Hollis Professor, I discovered that the Hollis Professor has the traditional privilege, of grazing a cow in the Harvard yard. That was one of the original perks of the Hollis Professor. So I said, look, I'm going to reclaim that right. So I did, and 2 weeks ago I had a wonderful time here. I borrowed a lovely brown Jersey cow from a friend of mine who runs a farm school out in the middle of Massachusetts. You may know that. It's a wonderful place with precisely that philosophy that people ought to be back in touch with where their food comes from, ought to be accustomed to living with the animals so we don't kill them, and ought to be reminded almost on an hourly basis of what sustains us in this world, which a lot of our civilization has cut us off from. So I brought this cow. Of course, I had notified the Harvard security people beforehand, and even got a little musical group to accompany this, and brought the cow into Harvard Yard, and there she was, grazing in Harvard Yard, bunching that grass, as cows had 200 years ago. And I made a little speech to hundreds and hundreds of, you can imagine, undergraduates and others scurrying to their classes and stopping to see what this crazy professor in his crimson doctoral robe was doing. I said, look, it shouldn't be so odd to see a cow in Harvard Yard. Here she is. She looks very serene and content. And why shouldn't we have at least a couple cows here? If Michelle Obama can have a have a garden at the White House. We could have something like this.